He referred to journalists here. How many people here are journalists? Can you see? Oh, not so many. Okay, it's not an audience of journalists then after all. Well, I feel all the better here. I'm not a journalist. I'm a source. Assuming this is an audience of journalists, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I was going to ask, how many of you in journalism school or wherever else or any other occasion, have had the occasion to sit in an audience and listen, or a seminar or whatever, and talk with a source? How many? Oh, quite a few. That's interesting. In front of a class or an audience. I'm surprised. Who was that?
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm confused by what you're.
Let me hear somebody else. Who actually talked to a source? It used to be, can I have anybody here volunteer? I used to be the source because I'd been identified, and that was because I was prosecuted. And when I was arrested, I did identify myself as the source. The New York Times actually did not acknowledge that for some 30 years, 25 or 30 years. They always referred to me as Daniel Ellsberg, the man who says he gave or claims he gave the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. And I complained about that several times, the managing editors, because I would call them up and I say, come on, people ask me, why are they saying that? What is this they're saying? Well, we don't reveal our sources. Yeah, but what if your source reveals himself having been prosecuted? And they didn't change that, actually. Actually, they have not for the last few years. My relation, actually, with the Times, until quite recently, there was a friendly talk, a panel with them a couple of years ago, which was a real change under a new managing editor, Jill Abramson. But I reminded her, it's the only time I met her, that I had been told by Cy Hirsch that Abe Rosenthal hated me. And she said, actually, she'd been surprised to learn that that was the case. She had gone into him once and said something friendly about me, and he showed very clearly I was very distasteful to him. Now, Abe Rosenthal was against was a supporter of the war, and had great contempt for anti-war activists like the Berrigans or like me in general. So I give him, sincerely, very great credit for doing what he did, at the risk of prosecution, actually, and at the risk, of course, of injunction, the first one in our history, for putting out the documents, despite those facts. And Hirsch's explanation for why Rosenthal was so down on me was he said that when you identified yourself, which Rosenthal felt I didn't have to do, and which was true, I didn't have to do, he said you took the story away from the Times, and it became Daniel Ellsberg's story rather than the Times story. And that was his explanation for why I was treated in ways I won't go into, but ways which I described to Julian Assange and would to Snowden and Manning if I had the occasion, to explain that the treatment of Assange, which infuriated Julian, very denigrating treatment by reporter John Burns, I think it was, under Bill Keller, describing his smelly, unwashed, terrible fitting clothes, just a real bag lady. In fact, they described him as looking like a bag lady and so on. And putting down his motives and his nature very much. And I said, you have to expect that of the Times. That's my experience. I've seen that with every whistleblower who's come along. And the reasons for it are interesting. I mean, not known to me, interesting to me. I would like to know a little better. I can only conjecture. But over time, I got the feeling that a lot of reporters and editors really looked on their sources, on whom they obviously depended very seriously. And I'm talking now not about the officials who feed them information that supports policy and supports their own careers. These are authorized leaks, in effect, which happen every day and every hour. But aside from those people who are treated very well because they are a continuing source of exclusives. Why exclusive? Because this stuff is classified. And that means if I tell you, it doesn't become declassified for you, so you get an exclusive. And next week I give it to him instead of you, but that's all right, because over time you all get your scoops and you all get your bylines and so forth. So actually journalists have been quite, and I'm quite critical of this, have been very tolerant of the system of secrecy and not inclined to look into how it's abused, or how to change it, or the laws that have to do with it. Now, the one time I met Abe Rosenthal, there's more to say about that too, but I won't take the time. The one time I met him was at a meeting of the AP Managing Editors Association, and we talked a little. And I said, what's the New York Times policy toward relation to sources who are being prosecuted? You know, in terms, implicitly, I was saying, you know, how do you treat them? How do you deal with the defense? How do you relate to the defense? He said, well, I'm not sure we have a policy. And I said, non-deferential, I said, well, I'm sure you don't, because I'm the first person ever prosecuted for a leak. Now, even if this is an audience of journalists, I would expect not more than one or two of you to have ever heard what I just said, unless you heard it from me. But the first prosecution for a leak was my and Tony Russo prosecution in 1971, which ended in 73 for governmental misconduct. There were two after that, one 10 years, 12 years later, another one about a dozen years later after that. Three before Obama. 3 leaks, 3 prosecutions, not 3 leaks. Okay, leaks every day, 3 prosecutions. Under Obama, now 8.
Wow.
8, or going on 9 if there is a sealed indictment against Assange, as his lawyers believe there is. So that would be 3 times the small number that all previous presidents together had put. Okay, I could talk more about the law, and I don't know if I'll have question and answers, but I don't want to focus on that at this moment. But on the relation of newspapers to sources and how we can have more whistleblowers. I do believe that investigative journalism is essential. The need for it is recognized, I've just seen in stories the last couple of days by Pierre Omidyar of eBay, who is launching a new journalistic enterprise, which will be totally digital, under my friend and journalistic hero, Glenn Greenwald. And basically, one could almost say that they have rather provocatively almost defined themselves as wanting to put out news that is more relevant to the public and cover stories that the New York Times does not. Now that might seem very presumptuous, but we actually are here today, and I'm very pleased to acknowledge it. Project Censored, and where's Nikki? Nikki, tell me.